Hi all, I have a very interesting game to show you today of Magnus Carlsen. He is playing with the black pieces against Boris Gelfand in this featured game today. And this game is in celebration of the free short and sweet course you can get at that link there, kingscrushertv.tv/Sheb So this is the Shebanenko Slav we're about to see, an example game in this variation. So in this 2012 World Blitz Championship round 30, let's see what happened. Boris Gelfand starts with d4, we have d5, c4 and now c6. So this is kind of like playing a London system with the black pieces. And those that love the London system, I know it's a mega popular opening with white. You might want something very solid with black. One of the snags is, though, with black, you're behind in development. And that bishop f4 move you have with white to set up the dreaded triangle, it might be exploitable because you're leaving behind a pawn when you're playing white in the London system. Here, in this variation of the Slav, that micro downside is kind of addressed. We see after knight f6 here, knight c3, black doesn't immediately play bishop f5. This move can suffer quite a bit potentially to cd and queen b3. White's lead in development puts pressure on b7 and d5 sometimes, and that can be extremely uncomfortable. But there's a really interesting creative solution move to address this kind of downside. So if you really want to play solidly with black, this is a very, very interesting idea, or move that it's represented as a6. And it takes away the b5 square from white, which could be useful. Sometimes there's horrible checks on b5 or a knight pouncing in on b5. It also vacates a7. This parking space on a7 can be used sometimes to defend this pawn with the ridiculous looking rook a7, believe it or not. So let's have a look at this game now. What happened after a6? It's tempting white to often play c5. As soon as white plays c5, though, you have undermining strategies like playing for e5 or b6 later. And a lot of games do go with c5 to test this. But in this game, we see actually e3, the modest e3 being played. And Magnus does get that bishop outside of the pawn chain, so he doesn't lock it into the pawn chain here. So it's testing this whole concept. Queen b3 hitting that b7 pawn. And now, so what is the solution? Well, I've mentioned it, rook a7. It's a cute little move, and maybe you think this is a bit ridiculous, but it's become a kind of standard idea over the last few years. We have bishop e2, h6, giving the bishop a nice retreat, like you would in the London system in reverse. C takes d5. We have c takes d5, knight e5. You might think the dark squares are pretty vulnerable here, particularly c5 and e5. Well, it's been tested. So e6, we have bishop d2. Now knight bd7, challenging that knight. Knight takes, white castles. Bishop d6. And white is a little bit more vulnerable than usual on h2 without that defensive knight. White plays a4 with some queenside intentions at coming soon. So black castles and now a5, locking down b6. We have now an aggressive move from Magnus, queen h4, so really exploiting the fact that the knight's not on f3, threatening checkmate in 1. We have f4. The problem with this is that it can be used as leverage potentially to open up this g-file. If this g-file is opened up, there could be a very important coordination point, a kind of combine and win on g2 aspect to this game as soon as that file's opened, because white's actually occupied on the queen side here and has already made a queen side commitment, so the king side might be a focal point for black later. We see the queen dropping back here, knight a4, and now we see the rook dropping back, offering a virtual draw. Actually, it's a virtual draw offer if white does take on b7, which he didn't. Boris didn't. He went to play for a win. If takes, then this is just a perpetual attack on the queen, for example. And I'm not sure there's anything that much better here than black to do that. But actually, Boris went for a win with knight b6. He does have the white pieces. As Mikhail Tal once said, it's kind of a sin to just play for a draw in a way with the white pieces. So knight b6. We have knight takes b6, queen takes b6, rook a c8. And now after rook a c1, Actually, there appears, on engine scrutiny of this game, there appears to be a killer move, which is not pin and win, is not combine and win. It's another type of win based on a potentially massive tactical liability. I wonder if you can spot it here, what Magnus missed. If I give you 5 seconds to pause the video, what would you play with black? There's actually a kind of, it virtually wins basically in this position. You might not think it because black really hasn't done anything. Black's got a solid position, but to win from this position, how? You might ask. So I'm hoping you might find that it's there. The win is there. You might want to pause the video as I say. Okay, Magnus went in, for a coordination, a common square strategy on g2 with bishop e4. It's tempting, the follow-up's clear, to try and open up the g file, use g2. But actually there's a kind of trap and win possibility here as well with the move. If you found this, give yourself 100 points. Bishop c2. It actually deprives the queen the b3 square. There's no backward retreat, and nor is there, of course, on b4. So the queen's kind of stranded. She's only got a7. So as an example, rook f2, rook c6. And once the queen goes back to a7, there's bishop b8. So that's the end of the queen there. We could put that on the board if you want, just to show. Well, it's going to be the queen's. Okay, the queen's got this possibility, but we can start winning lots of material. We can actually take on f4 and then go back here and then actually do this check and then win the queen. It's going to be a big advantage to black. Another variation, say king f2 as an example. So say king f2, just to put this on the board. Rook c6. Yeah, just wins the queen in a similar sort of fashion. Queen a7, yeah, we're just going to have this bishop b8. Yeah, as soon as the queen is going to be used as a way of winning material, it's going to be bad news for queen h4 later. So yeah, this is a killer move, believe it or not. Maybe it's worth putting in the toolkit there if there's a queen trying to be aggressive on the queen side. But yeah, Magnus played bishop e4. And we have the game continuing now with b4. And this doesn't really work now, bishop c2, because of b5. So g5 was played, trying to hone in on the g2 pawn. If bishop c2 here instead now, b5. And you can see that c6 is not available, and that white's queen is getting out and about. It's still a small edge for black, though. It's quite good for black there. But we have now g5, following through with the plan that Magnus was thinking of. b5, a takes, queen takes. We have g takes, e takes, and now queen f6 hitting d4, but also the queen might be going to g7 sometimes, or g6. We have queen b6 protecting d4, hitting the bishop, and now we have rook takes c1, rook takes c1, and now the threat of a mate in one with queen g7, so creating a common square. Combine and win strategy. So combining against g2, if rook c8 had been played here, this is interesting as well. For example, bishop going to e3, rook c3. This is also quite an interesting position from black's point of view. Black's got some very interesting, advantageous possibilities here. So yeah, this is very, very interesting as well. By the way, you might have been wondering after this rook c8, what about just queen takes d6? The thing is here, queen takes d4 is really crushing. As it turns out, after rook c2, white is pretty defenseless. White is a bishop up here, but it seems absolutely defenseless. If bishop f3, then bishop takes, and then queen d3 hitting f1 and f3. And if check, there's no way of defending here. If bishop e3, then there's queen e2. How does white actually defend in this position against both f3 and h2? I mean, f5 only defends h2, and then there's queen takes f3. So this is absolutely winning. For example, like this is checkmating. So if we look at this again, this is a remarkable situation actually, where rook c2 is absolutely winning. If bishop d1, bishop takes g2 is checkmate. So yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. And if we look at this again, so bishop takes f3, g takes, queen d3. There's just no defense available here. We looked at check and bishop e3 of queen e7, then just queen takes f3 and queen takes g2. So yes, you might be wondering about this resource rook c8. By getting the queen to d6, it just turns out that this is absolutely a crushing position. Okay, I hope that answers that particular question. Okay, so if instead bishop f3 in that position, then bishop takes and then rook c2, yeah, there's a lot of dangers here for the king. If, for example, like this, it's going to be big trouble against white's king. There's no time to win that bishop there, and white's collapsing there. So yeah, there's some very, very interesting possibilities after rook c8. Okay, so we have actually, after bishop takes c1, queen g7, and now bishop f3 defending that mate. Bishop drops back, bishop e7, bishop e3, we have bishop d3 now, and here white played queen takes b7. If rook d1 was played, this is sacrificing the exchange. If rook d1, maybe Boris didn't like the look of bishop a6. I mean, it's about equal here. f5 might be an interesting try, but it's about equal. So he wanted to keep his passed pawn, and he sacrificed the exchange. So a very fun continuation. We have Magnus winning the exchange. Queen takes e7, and now the bishop dropped back. f5 was played, trying to undermine black's pawn structure. E takes is played. Rook b8 was also, it's a pretty strong move here, rook b8, to try and get an attack, it seems. If f takes, check, and rook f1 checkmate as an example. So that did seem like a strong possibility. g3, then bishop takes f5, and that's good for black. So anyway, we have e takes f5, and now bishop takes d5, queen g6. Things get a bit chaotic now after queen h4. Rook b8 is played, h3, queen d6, and here is a critical mistake actually. Boris played bishop a2 better, and he could have been still in the game with bishop takes h6 here. This is very, very interesting with queen g5, and if that pawn's pinned, so there's no queen g6. And so, for example, queen takes d5, this is mating. So this actually would be very interesting. If check and f4, then again check and a6. This leads to a position which should be about equal actually. So bishop a2 is a mistake here, and we have rook b2. So actually Magnus' attack is back on here, hitting a2 and looking at g2. Bishop f4, queen g6, so looking at g2, threatening a mate in 1 again. Bishop d5, parrying the mate threat. Bishop e4, renewing the mate threat by interrupting that diagonal. We have bishop takes e4, f takes, and now g3. This weakens, though, severely that rank. And in fact, black now plays a fantastic move. Magnus plays a really fantastically strong move. I wonder if you can guess it if I give you 5 seconds. Pretty logical, actually. Nothing spectacular. Okay, e3. It opens up the queen for queen b1. Yeah, the rook's already controlling escape squares. And here, queen g4, but now after taking, this is just winning after rook b1 check. The pawn is going to win the bishop, and black is absolutely winning. The game ended here. So, for example, with king g2, if the game did continue with king g2, e2, and in this position, just winning a bishop, and the pawns can be collected at ease actually after. So I'll take you to the game end position. So yes, Magnus Carlsen has used this a6 weapon quite a bit actually in all sorts of time controls. It has gained a lot of popularity in recent years, this 4a6 system. It's something maybe you might want to consider, and not, you have to be prepared though, and the free short and sweet course will help you get prepared in some of the core lines. So very, very interesting, this Shebanenko Slav 4a6, as it's sometimes kind of known as, Shebanenko Slav. It's almost as I say, it's a bit like playing a London system with black in my view. But coping with that micro downside, that the bishop, once it departs c8 with black, you're sometimes under great pressure on b7, and it kind of addresses that little downside by giving a7, you know, as an interesting parking space for the rook. So, okay. Comments, questions, likes, shares, subscribes, all appreciated as well. Thanks very much.
Chess is an exercise in awareness. It is evolution in motion. I evolved. This is where I am today. I like the feeling of strength that the pawn on d5 gives me. It feels like building a castle, a fortress. Pawn goes to d5. It is supported by its brother on c6. The knight comes to f6 for more stability. The bishop goes out to f5 as a guard outside the gates. Eventually, the pawn on e6 forms the triangle for the safest pawn structure in the center. It gives me confidence for the upcoming battle. This is the Chebanenko Slav.